Hi there, my name's Kelsey, and today we're going to be making a simple calculator game with Scratch. So, as you may know, this is an intermediate level project because it will rely on use of broadcasting, variables, if statements, and operators. So let's get started. The first thing we're going to need to do is make our sprites. So I'm going to come down here and click Paint. So I'm going to start by making our buttons. We're going to need a total of 12 buttons for numbers 0 to 9, and then a decimal and a negative sign. So I'm going to start by just making a gray button, and I want it to have a black outline so that it stands out a little bit. So that's how I'm going to make mine. And then we're just going to put a number in the middle. So in this case, I'm starting with number 1. Although we can't see it because the paint color is black. So you'll see we can change it to black and make it bigger, and then we'll just center it in the middle of our button. I'm going to center the button so that it's easier to tell where it is, and then we'll just center this number right in the middle. All right, so that's our number 1 button done. And then we'll just do the same thing for each of our other buttons. I'm going to go in and change the number, and then right click on it and duplicate it. So you'll see, I'm just going in. I've done 3. I'm going to duplicate it, make 4. And this is how we're going to make all of our buttons. So remember, we're not going to have a button for the number 10. We're just going to have 0 to 9, and we can use the 0 to make a 10 if we really needed to. So you'll see, I'm just going in, duplicating each one. A lot of the code for this calculator is going to be fairly repetitive, so we'll be able to duplicate things like this quite often, which is convenient for us, because although the code is long, it's quite repetitive. So I'm just coming in here and going to duplicate it. We'll make our 9 button. Then we'll make our 0, and we're also going to need a negative sign and a decimal. So here, I'm just going to do the decimal, and then we will make our negative. So I'm going to duplicate that, and there we go. I'm just going to change where these are located because I want them to be relatively centered. And then the decimal, I'm going to make sure that's centered in the lower part as well. So you'll see right now these are really big, so I'm just going to scale them down. We'll see 50 looks about good for now. So I'm just going to go into each of these, change the size to 50. And once that's done, we'll make our operator buttons. So as far as operators go, we're going to need an addition, a subtraction, a multiplication, and a division. So we'll work on those as soon as I'm done resizing these. So you'll see, just going in, changing the size to 50, because we want them to be small enough that we can fit them on the calculator. So the calculator, in my example, I'm not going to make it take up the whole screen. I'm just going to do a part of the screen. So that's why I'm making the buttons a little bit smaller. So now we can get started on our operators. So I'm going to paint another one. And I'm going to make my operators a different color because I want them to stand out a little bit. So I'm going to make mine like this bluish color. So I'm going to start, and I'm going to make a rectangle just so that we have the button shape. And then after that, I'm going to put my symbol inside of it. So in this case, I'm going to do a plus, although we can't see that because once again, the fill color is different. So I'm going to make it black so that it stands out. and then we'll make it bigger so that it can be seen. And because I realize my rectangle is a little bit longer than I need it to be, I'm going to grab it and just trim it down a little bit. And we'll recenter our plus, and there's one button. So then I'm just going to do the same thing, duplicate it, and make one with a subtraction. So there we go, there's our subtraction symbol. I'm going to center that. And then once again, we'll duplicate it. This next one's going to be multiplication. So we'll do that, and you'll see, since I used a capital X, it's a little bit large. So I'm going to shrink it down a little and stick it right back in the middle. And now we just have our division. I'm going to go in and do that. And there we go. We have our addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. So the next thing we're going to do is make our equals button. I'm going to use the same method that I used before, just the rectangle. In this case, I want my equal button to be green, because that's just how I find it easier to see. I'm going to make it green, tone the color down a little bit. And then we'll just add our text with the equal sign. And once again, we need to change the color because it'll automatically set it to the last color you used. And then here, I'm just going to make it bigger so that it's easier to see. And there we go. We have that. I'm going to size these down a little bit. I'm going to see how 70 looks a little bit better, because once again, we don't want the buttons to be too large, otherwise we won't be able to fit them on. So we're going to do this, and then right after this, we're going to get on to making our backdrop. So here we go. For my backdrop, all I'm going to do is make a larger rectangle to start. And I'm going to fill this in like a dark gray color, because that's the color that I want for it. So I'll choose like that kind of color, and I'm going to center it because we want to make sure that this is right in the middle of our screen. So there we go, that's centered. And then what we're going to do is we're going to make another little rectangle. I'm starting mine off to the side so that I can see how wide it is. And we're going to make it in a lighter color because this is going to look like the window of the calculator where all of our calculations are going to appear. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start by centering it down at the bottom. And then we can move it up after. So we'll see it's centered. Oh, not quite. So we'll see it's centered. And then I'm just going to move it up a little bit. You'll see it's gradually moving up. And that way it will be evenly placed right at the top of our screen. So once that's up there, we can get on to moving our buttons. I'm going to grab that and move it down a bit. And there we go. I'm going to change the color of this because it almost exactly matches our buttons. So I'm going to make this one a little bit lighter. And there we go. You can clearly see that they're different. So now I'm going to go in and rearrange these so that it looks like a calculator. So I'm going to start with our number 1 button, place that over there, and then we'll grab 2 and 3. And I'm going to make sure to move these over so that we have room for our operator buttons. Then at the top, I'm just going to put my plus button. You can place your buttons wherever you'd like them. I like mine on the right-hand side, and it does make a little bit more sense to have them all in order. But you can do whatever you want since it's going to be your project. So here we go. I'm placing these. And you'll notice that it might take a little bit of work to get everything organized, but once it's in place, we don't need to worry about the buttons moving because there are no moving parts in this project. So once you've placed the buttons where you want them, you can just leave them there and they won't get moved around. So you'll see I'm just placing the 0, the negative, and the decimal right now. And then we're going to go in and fix our operator buttons, place those where we want those. And we're almost done. So you can make sure that they're aligned. And I notice I have a little bit of uneven spacing up here. So I'm going to go in and fix that. That way we have all of our operators in one section. And I'll notice that my equal sign is a little bit too big. So I'm just going to go over here to the costume section and I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. So there we go. That should have helped. So now I'm just going to make sure everything's where I want it. And we'll be good to start. All right, so I'm happy with this, how this is looking so far. So we're going to get on to coding our buttons to start. So for each button is going to have essentially the same code. So what you're going to need is you're going to need an event and you're going to do when this sprite clicked. And then all the button is going to do is broadcast a specific message. So in this case, for button 1, I want it to broadcast message 1. Usually we would need to make this message, but this is the default message it comes with, so we're just going to use that. And then we're going to do the same thing for number 2. So when this sprite clicked, broadcast, and we're going to make a new one. I'm going to call this one message 2. And so on. What we can do if we want it to be more convenient is we can open up our backpack. And you'll see if you just drag your code block into it, and then you let go, it will make a copy of it. So then what we can do is we can go on to our next sprite, and you can just drag the code block right out, and it just places itself right in there. So then you'll just make a new message. In this case, I'm going to call mine message 3, and so on. So you'll go in and you'll do this for each of your sprites. Message 4. And you're going to do this for every one of your sprites. What this will essentially do is later on, we're going to define what happens when each message is broadcasted. And then that will allow us to use the buttons to control what happens with the calculator. Okay, so you'll see we're almost halfway done. Just moving on to message 6 right now. And you'll see it's very simple. We're just basically using the same code block and changing what message is broadcasted. And if you ever get into the, and now we're on 8. So message 8. And you'll see now we're coming up to 9. And we're just going to make that message 9. And now we only have 3 left. We have our 0, our decimal, and our negative sign. In this case, I'm just calling my decimal message decimal. And then my negative, I'm just going to call it message negative. I could call it just decimal or negative. I'm just putting message in front of it because it helps me remember that it's a message and it makes it easier for you guys to tell what it is. So there we go, message negative. And we're done with all of these buttons. So now what we're going to do is we're going to move on to our operators. So I'm going to start with our plus button. So what we're going to do is, again, we're going to grab our when this sprite clicked, and then we're going to go to our variables, and we're going to want to make a new one that we're going to call operation. So this is what we're going to use to make sure that the calculator does the right thing. If we want to add, it will add. If we want to multiply, it'll multiply, and so on. So what we're going to do is we're going to set operation to plus, because right now we're working with our plus button. And then what we're going to do is we're going to make two more variables. We're going to call one number, and this is going to be the first number that's inputted. And then we're going to make another one. I'm just going to call this number 2 because it's going to be the second number that we input. And I'm going to hide all of these at the moment. And then what we're going to do is we're going to grab a hide variable and we're going to hide number. But then we're going to show number 2. So this will make it so that you'll type in your first number and it'll show that, and then you'll hit plus and it'll clear the screen, and then you'll type in your second number. And when you hit equals, the whole equation will show up. So there we go. That's the code for the first operator button. And now we're just going to do the same thing for all of our other operators. So like before, I'm just going to drag this into the backpack because it makes things simpler. And then we can go on to our next one. So this one is negative. So in this case, I'm going to change operation to, in this case, I'm going to do minus. And then we're on to multiplication. Here, I'm going to do times. And then now we're on to division. So now we're just going to do divide. Okay, so we're done with that. And that is all of our operators finished. Okay, so now we're done with all of our operator buttons. And you'll notice that, for example, you may have a variable that shows up if we press this. And it will show up and it will say number 2, and then it'll show the value. So what we can do, because for our calculator, we just want to show the value. We don't need to see that it's called number 2. So if you click large readout, you'll see we'll show just the number that we want. So that's what we can use to make sure that it looks the way we want it to. And so we can make sure that we do this for all the others. So I'm going to do the same thing for number 2. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show variable, and in this case, I'm going to do number 2. And if I click on that, you'll see it'll show it up there, and we see that it looks right. So then I'm going to choose show just number. And we'll see if we do that, it will just show this. So we're going to right click on it and choose large readout again. And we're just going to drag it to the exact same spot as number 2. So there we go. That's how you can set up your variables so that they look right and they'll show up in that section. So now let's get on to our equal sign. So the first thing we're going to want to do is define what happens when the green flag is pressed. So when this is pressed, we want to hide our solution variable. So this is a new variable that we're going to need to make, and we're going to call it solution. So this is going to be the answer that will show up in this section. So once again, we're going to choose large readout so that this looks correct. And you'll see if we add one of those back so that we can see it, we can stick this on top and make sure that the placement is correct. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by hiding variable solution, because we don't want anything to show up. We just want this to be blank. And then we're going to set solution to 0, because we want the answer to be 0 if nothing's been put into the actual expression itself. Then we're also going to set operation to 0, because that will mean that nothing's been done so far, no adding, subtracting, multiplying, or dividing. And next, we're just going to set number 1 and number 2 to blank. So down here, I'm going to start by clicking number, and here we're just going to delete the 0 and just leave it blank. And then now we want to show our number variable and hide number 2, so that only the first number that is inputted will be showing up to start. And then after that, as we already defined in all of our operators down here, when those are pressed, only number 2 will show. So you'll see we'll hide number and show number 2. So that's how we're going to handle these different numbers. So that's the green flag clicked code that we're done with. And now we're going to move on to the when this sprite click code to handle what happens when the equal sign is pressed. Okay, so we're going to start by dragging out a when this sprite clicked block, because we want this code to run when we press the equal button. So to start, we want to hide variable 2, because at this point, remember, we're going to be wanting to show the solution, not our number. So we're going to go up here and do hide number 2. And then now we have a couple if statements to do. So I'm going to go and grab those. We need a couple if and else. And I'm just going to stick them inside one another. So there we go. We'll start with that. So to start, we're going to grab an operator, and we want to check if the operator is equal to times. So I'm just going to go down to variables and grab our operation, because remember when we did our operator buttons down here, you'll notice we did set operation to times. So we want to check, and if operation is equal to times, we're going to set our solution to, and in this case, we're going to go to our operators and grab the multiplication, and we're going to want it to multiply number 1 and number 2. So that's exactly what we're going to be doing. So set the solution to number times number 2. And then if that doesn't happen, it'll move on to the else, in which case we're going to check if the operation is divide. So I just duplicated that. And now I'm going to check if it's divide. And if so, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to set solution, and we want to set it to number 1 divided by number 2. So here we go. I'm going to grab that. Make sure that you don't put number 2 divided by number 1, because if you do that, your math will get a little bit confused, and it will be harder to tell what the correct answer is. So we've got number divided by number 2. And now we're just going to do the same thing for a minus. So I'm going to duplicate that, put it in this if operation is equal to minus Then, again, we'll want to set the solution. And you probably guessed it by now. We're going to set it to number 1 minus number 2. So we'll go down to variables, grab our number and number 2. And there we go. So you'll see we have our multiplication, division, subtraction, and now we need addition. But you'll notice that we don't have another if statement, and this is because the code will run through, check if it's multiplication, division, subtraction, and if it's none of those, that leaves only addition left. So we're going to do the exact same thing that we would have done before, just without the if part. So we're just going to set the solution, and then we're going to set it to number 1 plus number 2. So we're going to go in and grab that, and then drag our number So you'll see I was having a little bit of trouble getting these orange ones into the operator, but there we go. So now we're done with that part. And now what we're going to want to do is we're going to handle what happens if something goes wrong. So here I'm going to grab one more if statement. And it doesn't need to be an else if. Here we're just going to do an if. And we're going to need a couple operators. So we're going to grab an or. And then we're going to grab 2 of these blank is equal to blank and stick them inside of this or. And what we're going to want to do is, you'll see if we go down to variables, we can grab our solution button. And in this case, we want to check if solution is equal to infinity or negative infinity. So just the negative sign and then infinity, because if so, it means there's an error and something's gone wrong. So in that case, we're going to set solution, and in here, you'll type whatever you want your error message to be. So in this case, I'm going to do error, try again. So that's going to be our error message, and you'll see if that were to happen, it would display error, try again up in the solution box up there. So now that that's done, what we can do is we can work on hiding and showing our variables. So to start, we're going to want to show our solution variable. So I'm going to go down here and choose solution. Then we're going to want to set number to the solution. So this will just make sure that our initial number, or number 1, is equal to the solution itself. Because that will mean that if, say we did 8 times 8 is 64, and then you wanted to do 64 divided by 10, you wouldn't need to type in 64 again, you could just use the previous number that we had. So there we go, we'll set number to solution, and then we want to hide our solution variable. Because remember, we don't need it right now because number 1 will be taking over. So we'll hide our solution variable, and because we've hidden that, we want to show our number variable. So I'm going to do that. And then we just want to reset number 2. So I'm going to grab this set my variable, and instead of my variable, we're going to change it to number 2. And then we're just going to delete this 0 and leave it blank for now. So there we go. That's the completed code for our equal sign. So now we finish all of our buttons, and we just need to do the backdrop. So let's get started. The first thing we're going to need to do is define what happens when the backdrop receives each message. So I'm going to start, and I'm just going to start with message 0. So in this case, we're going to grab an if-else statement, and we want to check if the operation is equal to 0. So we're going to need an operator with the equal. And here I'm going to put 0 in there. Now we're going to go down to variables and grab our operation. So if the operation is equal to 0, we want to set our number to, so this is going to be our first number. And now we're going to go to operators and we're going to use the join. So what this will do is it will allow us to join two things together. So in this case, I'm going to go down to our variables and we're going to join number and whatever number it is. So in this case, the number would be 0. So there we go, that's that. And then if not, if operation is equal to 1 or 2 or so on, we're just going to set number 2 to join number 0. So that's how we'll make the first one. And we're going to need one of these for every button that we have. So you'll have a total of 12 because you'll have the number 0 to 9 and then your negative and your dot. So what we can do for that is we'll just duplicate it and we'll make the next one. In this case, I'm going to change 0 to 1 and you'll just go in here and change these join number from 0 to 1. And now we'll duplicate that and we'll make it for 3. So just let me scroll over to the side here and we'll make message 3. Then we'll join number 3, join number 3, and there we go. I'm going to close this backpack so that we have a little bit more room. And we'll duplicate that again and we'll move on to 4. So you'll see we're just going to go through and for every one of these, we're just going to change the numbers. And this number, this join number, and then whatever number we input is essentially just making sure that that number is going to show up in the operation or the math sentence. So if we didn't do this, the calculator wouldn't work at all because it would be as if the button wasn't pressed in the first place. So that's why this section is so important and you'll want to double check and make sure that you don't miss any of the buttons. So once again, just going through, we'll change the message. In this case, I want message 6. And then you'll have to change the number to match. If you make a mistake with this, this is most likely where your calculator is going to have some errors. So you'll just want to go in and double check and make sure that everything is where it should be and that all of your numbers are correct. So here we're on to message 7. So we're going to do that. And we'll duplicate them. You could, of course, as always, you can make them on your own. It's just a lot simpler, especially with some longer or more complicated code blocks like this, to just make them individually by duplicating them. Otherwise, you could drag out the code blocks and make your own. If you need more practice, I suggest doing that. It's a really good way to learn. But for me, since I'm showing you and it's more simple this way, you'll see I'm just going in and duplicating them. So there we go. We have so far 0, 1, 2. Oh, you'll notice that we've missed number 2. I went 0, 1, and 3. So I'm just going to duplicate that. And up here, I'm just going to add in our number 2. So you'll notice it's very hard to keep track of them sometimes. You'll need to double check and make sure that everything's right. So we have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And now we're just going to need our decimal and our negative. So we'll select our message decimal. And you're just going to replace the number with a period for this one. And now we're on to our negative. So the only thing that's going to be different about the negative is because if you look at our decimal example, you'll always be typing a number and then the decimal and then maybe another number. So we'd have 1 point something or 2 point something and so on. But with this example, Say, for example, you wanted to do -7, you wouldn't do 7 and then a negative sign, we'd do the negative sign and then the 7. So we're going to change the number over to the second spot, and you'll see it still fills an apple because that was the default, and we're going to put the negative sign in there. So now this should be our completed calculator. So let's run it and find out how it works. So the one thing you might notice is if we run it, say we did 8 times 8, you'll notice it's showing us 88. So that's because for the second one, instead of just our number, you're going to want to put number 2. So I'm just going to go in and swap that out for every one of these. And then afterwards we can run it and we'll see how it works. So I'm just going in and swapping out any on this second section. Any time it says number, we're just going to stick a number 2 in there. And that will just make sure that instead of adding your two numbers together, so say 4 plus 4 would be 44, it's going to add them correctly. So 4 plus 4 would be 8. So we're just going to go up to this upper section and fix all of these. And then once this is done, we'll run it and see how our project is. Keep in mind that it's kind of hard to keep these apart sometimes, so you might need to go over and review your code. You can always double check with the video and use that to check your work. So let's test it out. I'm going to press the green flag to reset it, and then I'm going to do 8 times 8, and then it will equal 64. So you'll see our calculator will work like that, and if you press the green flag, it will clear it up again. So there we go, that's our calculator game. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Again, if you have any issues, feel free to go back in the video and review your code. And have fun with this project.